This is the Voyage Report podcast, where you get the scoop on travel. Now, the editor-in-chief of the Voyage Report, Mark Albert.
Greetings, fellow travelers, and welcome. Today, we're going to talk with the co-founder of America's largest nonprofit travel advocacy organization. Charlie Leocha is the current president of Travelers United, the author of the book Travel Rights, and a member of the Department of Transportation's Advisory Committee for Aviation Consumer Protections. He's joining us today via Skype from Travelers United World Headquarters in Virginia. Charlie, welcome to the Voyage Report podcast.
Hey, glad to be here.
So much to talk about here. Tell us more about your group, Travelers United.
Well, basically, I came to Washington back in 2009, and I noticed that there really wasn't any good way for consumers to have any voice in government. And so, in terms of the travel side. And so I started up Travelers United. We used to be called Consumer Travel Alliance. And over the years, we've now become probably the most trusted and most quoted, for sure, consumer travel advocacy organization in D.C. And we work with the Department of Transportation, we work with Congress, we work with staffers, we work with the different committees, all to try to make sure that the consumer voice is heard. And I consider myself an education operation. We educate Congress and stakeholders about what consumer issues are, and we educate consumers about what the rules and regulations are that control travel.
You've gone to battle over a lot of issues. What are some of Traveler United's top accomplishments that you've had advocating on behalf of travelers?
Well, the big thing that we did is we finally got inside of the system. Most consumer advocacy groups in Washington spend a lot of time sending out press releases. They operate via sometimes via legal challenges and lawsuits, and so on. But what I found out was that not a lot of these organizations actually pound the pavement. They don't walk the halls of Congress. They don't go in and meet with the Department of Transportation on a regular basis. And that's what I really started to do. And in all fairness, since I started this back at about 2009, we have had an effect on a lot of the other organizations. And more people now are meeting directly with staffers, meeting with the people at different committees and so on. And a lot of that I like to take a little bit of credit for, because I make sure that the committees reach out to a lot of the consumer groups, because I wanted to maximize the power of the voter input on changes in Washington.
We'll let you definitely pat yourself on the back. It's been a good ride.
And so far, it's been a good ride. And, for instance, just the other day, we heard that no longer is the Department of Transportation going to examine a rulemaking, which they've been looking at since 2011, about airline price transparency. And basically what happens now is if you go online, if you go to a travel agent, they can tell you what the basic airfare is. However, the airlines don't want them telling you what all the extra fees are. You're going to learn that later on from the airlines. And we have been trying to get that included into the pricing and into a system so that a travel agent can give you an overall cost of your trip instead of just cost of airfare. Well, DOT pulled back on that, and I've now called or asked to have a meeting with all the other major consumer groups in Washington. And we're actually meeting on next Wednesday to talk about these issues, to see what we can do as a group to get DOT working again for consumers.
Right, and of course the airlines are not in favor, because it would make the price look higher when you're initially searching for airfare.
It would make the price look higher, but if everybody's price has to go up, then it's okay. And I don't think that it's going to change that kind of a competitive dynamic. But right now, consumers have no way to comparison shop for airfares. You can only comparison shop for, let's say, you can't comparison shop for the total cost of flying. You only comparison shop based on airfares. But when you throw in seat reservation fees, when you throw in things like baggage fees, and then when you add in all of the exceptions and exemptions based upon what level of frequent flyer program you're in, what credit card you're using, and so on. It becomes very, very complex. And this is where, at this point, consumers really need the help of good data so that computers can help them come up with the best possible solution for their travels.
And even now we're seeing some airlines take their data away from third-party online travel agencies and bookings, so it's even harder sometimes to try to price compare. It has been a very busy year for travel news. Charlie, what do you think is the most significant development this year for travelers?
Well, I think that the biggest splash, at least according to the media, happened when United Airlines literally beat their passenger into submission, dragged them off the airplane, only to make room for a couple of their own deadheaders. And I just was amazed at that. And it did result in the airlines making some changes immediately to how they deal with denied boarding compensation and how they deal with bumping passengers. But surprisingly, Congress hasn't done a thing yet. DOT found United to have followed every possible rule perfectly. They didn't even fine them a penny. And meanwhile, Dr. Dow comes out missing teeth, bloody, and everything else. So it was a big wake-up call for the airlines to get their act together, but doesn't seem to have been much of a wake-up call for our lawmakers and our rule makers, who are still hemming and hawing, dragging their feet, and not doing what they're really paid for.
And we're talking about Dr. David Dow, who was pulled off a United flight, dragged through the aisle of that United flight in Chicago in April. And you referred to the bumping, and a lot of airlines, Delta, United, etc., either decided they would no longer involuntarily bump somebody if they can avoid it, or they've simply raised the compensation level. I think Delta up to $10,000, United 9,500. Now, of course, you're not realistically ever going to get that full amount because they'll find somebody at a lower amount to take that amount. But certainly, they did change their policies after that. And as you referred to, lawmakers, though, even though they talked tough, there was that congressional hearing afterwards where they brought some of the airline CEOs. They warned them that if they don't act to improve customer service, that lawmakers will. In fact, there was even Charlie, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I think there was a Customers Not Cargo Act that was introduced shortly after that to ban involuntarily bumping. But it sounds like you're disappointed that lawmakers talk tough, but really didn't hold the airline's feet to the fire.
Well, we're facing a situation where, yes, I'm very disappointed. And I am even more disappointed in DOT for not fining United Airlines for not following the rules that they should have followed. And so that is something which I don't have a good solution to right now. It's something which we're discussing with other groups. However, it's something which needs to change. Another example, in the FAA reauthorization bill, every 5 years or so, we try to have a reauthorization of the Federal Aviation Administration. And this is to pay for the new air traffic control system and to keep planes flying and so on. Well, part of that also we've got a whole customer service part. And this year, we worked like mad to get what we call Families Sitting Together Act passed. And that means that any family, if they've got a child who's traveling with them, 13 and younger, don't have to pay extra to sit next to their children. Right now, if they only have reserved seat requirements on all these planes, then they have to pay extra to sit next to their kid. But we wanted to have it set up so that they don't have to pay extra to keep the family together. It seemed to be absolutely ludicrous to have a 4-year-old separated from the mother by, 3 or 4 rows or even 10 rows or even a seat away. And so Congress responded. They actually passed a law that says families have to be able to sit together when they are flying and at no extra cost. And then the other law that we got passed was a law saying that if the airlines charge you a baggage fee and then they don't they don't deliver your bag to you at the destination for some reason, and it's delayed by 8 hours or 12 hours, that the Congress wants the baggage fee to be refunded for not performing the service. So these two laws were passed by Congress. They're laws of the land. However, under the Obama administration, and it continued under the Trump administration, the Department of Transportation, who is responsible for putting the rules together to put the laws into effect, have not done their job. So here we are 18 months after the bills were passed, and we still don't have the law on the books. People and families are still paying extra to sit next to their kids. And if your luggage is delayed by 8, 10, 12, 2 days or a week, you don't get a penny back from the airlines. The only time you get any money back on your baggage fee is if the baggage is totally lost. And that happens not that frequently, but at least we got that much done.
And you're talking about these laws that were passed, but the DOT still has to issue the regulations, put the meat on the bone, so to speak, and publish it in the Federal Register to get it actually in place. That's what you're saying that they have not done yet. Exactly.
And it's something where I used to think that once a law is passed, that's it. And in this law, they said, okay, all the rules have to be written within 1 year. Well, after 1 year, nothing had happened. Now, after another 6 months, nothing has happened. So we're waiting. And basically, we just have let's say, a department, of transportation that's not doing their job. And one of the real important things that most people don't realize is that the Department of Transportation is a unique department. Unlike agriculture, commerce, and a lot of the other departments, the Department of Transportation is the area and the department which is responsible for airline travelers. And if we have a problem, airline travelers cannot go to the local courts and complain. We can't go to the Better Business Bureau. We can't get upset with the airlines via some sort of legal system. We have to go through a complaint system with the Department of Transportation. The Department of Transportation then becomes the prosecutor, the judge, and the jury for most Americans. You can, as a citizen, take your complaint to the federal court levels because it's federal preemption is what's causing this. But to get anything heard at the federal level costs an enormous amount of money. And I don't know of any individual consumers that have ever done it that way. We always have to find some way to get it done using an organization or a class action approach. And even there's been almost no actions at the federal court level, except for a couple of our actions with other consumer groups to force the airlines or to force the FAA in one specific case to tell us how they've tested seats so we know that the airplanes are safe. And so it's an ongoing system, but DOT is responsible for our safety and for customer service, and they're the ones that we have to go to and work through. And when DOT is not working, it's as though your police department in your local town just says, look, we're not going to enforce the law anymore. And that's what we're facing right now.
Well, few things make a family matter than when they can't sit with their kids. And so I think a lot of parents listening to this podcast are certainly in favor of the DOT writing those regulations so that law can begin to be enforced. And speaking of enforcement, we heard that the Department of Transportation now is no longer enforcing rules on making airlines honor mistake or error fares. Now they just have to reimburse travelers for any non-refundable expenses that they may have made after booking the journey. I had some first-person experience with this. I recently had an airfare that was canceled 11 days after purchase. I mean, that's obscene. 11 days after purchase, an incredible length of time. I did file a complaint with the DOT. So let me ask you, Charlie, you talked about recourses, and we can file complaints with the DOT. Is that a realistic option? Do you encourage travelers when they have an issue with an airline or another travel provider that they file one of these complaints on the website?
Absolutely. Because the only way that the Department of Transportation ever comes up with an idea of where they have problems is when we have a complaint lodged with them. Every complaint you make to an airline stays in the airline system. It doesn't necessarily have to be bumped up to the Department of Transportation. And therefore, the Department of Transportation, if they don't get complaints, they're flying blind on what consumers really want. They've got me to listen to when I come in and complain, but it really helps to have more and more people using the DOT system so that we can list the most egregious conduct of airlines and have it statistically useful to us when we're talking with Congress and with the Department of Transportation.
You mentioned a moment ago about lawmakers. You wrap them on the knuckles for their actions or inactions. You testified on Capitol Hill earlier this year about flyer compensation rates. This is something you felt passionately about. And you told lawmakers on the House Aviation Subcommittee that, quote, passengers are being punished for the failures of the airlines. What did you mean, Charlie?
Well, what happens right now is when there's an IT failure, let's say there's a reservation system shuts down, the airlines tend to treat that like it's a snowstorm. And they go, gee, we're really sorry, but you have to redo your tickets, and you've only got a certain window to get your tickets rewritten. Otherwise, we'll refund the airfares, or everything will just stay the same. And so what ends up happening is that the passengers are the ones who have to jump through all the hoops, and the airlines, who created the problem because they don't have a steady and functioning reservation system and computer system, they get all the benefits of everybody else working to solve the problems that they created. And one of the things that I've been trying to get the Department of Transportation to do is to say, when that happens, it's the problem of the airline. The airline has to make some sort of restitution to its passengers. And so far, we're having a real problem in trying to get that message through to DOT. But the airlines definitely understand it because they get very hot under the collar whenever I bring up the issue.
Well, and many travelers probably don't know they can be due some compensation from airlines for mishaps that occur during a journey, including lost bags. You've been very vocal about wanting Congress to do more to publicize compensation rates. So when it comes to compensation rates, what do travelers need to know? What are they due, and how do they claim that?
Well, the sad state of affairs is that basically we only get compensation as passengers when under three circumstances. Number one is if your flight is overbooked, you can get compensation up to $1,350 in cash if you ask for it, if you're denied boarding involuntarily. Now, if you make a deal with the airline and they say, we'll give you $1,000 in airline scrip, then you get a little chip from the airlines that you can use for a year. But if they give you green cash, you can use it anytime, anywhere. And so you can ask them for green cash if you are involuntarily bumped from an airline. That's one. Two, if your luggage is lost, delayed, or damaged, you can get, on a domestic flight, you get up to $3,500 in compensation. Now, you have to show them some sort of basis for coming up with that amount of money. But let's say if you have a Toomey bag and a couple of good suits, that takes care of it right there. It used to be that you would only get something in the hundreds of dollar range. Now we've got up to $3,500, something which we have been responsible for in terms of starting the rulemaking and getting that through the Secretary of Transportation's office. The other time that you get it is also on lost bags internationally, but those follow different rules, and you are limited to only around $600 for lost luggage internationally. And the final rule is a rule on delays, and it has to do with the European Union. If you're flying an airplane that is painted in the colors of a European Union from the United States to Europe, and the flight is 4 hours late, then you get 600 euros, which is about $750 or so in compensation. If you're flying on a U.S. carrier from here to Europe and it's late, you get nothing. However, all carriers from Europe back to the United States have to follow the 4-hour delay rule, and everybody is eligible for up to 600 euros if their flight is 4 hours late. So that becomes a big deal for consumers. And these rules aren't written down anywhere. They should be very, very clear to consumers. And so what I've tried to do is I've talked to the Department of Transportation during our hearings at the Advisory Committee for Aviation Consumer Protection. We've worked on it there as well. We want to try to get posters up at airports that say, flight delayed, you have rights. Luggage lost, damaged, stolen, you have rights. Denied boarding, you have rights. At least letting people know where they can go to find out where these rights are. And that would change the whole dynamic, because that starts to level the playing field between the passenger and the airline. No longer are we petitioning the airline to please tell us what our rights are. We can go to the airline and say, look, these are the rules, I want this.
And the European compensation you're referring to, that's the famous or infamous EU 261, right?
Right, I think that's what it is. But the number is unimportant. The fact that it's there is very, very important.
Listeners, we are talking with Charlie Leocha, the president and co-founder of Travelers United, an advocacy organization that's been around for, what now, Charlie, 10 years? A decade?
Just about a decade. We started in 2009 at the beginning of the year, and we're coming up on 2018, so it's about, what do we say, 8 years? 9 years, I guess, yeah.
And you can follow his organization on Twitter at Travelers.org and on Facebook at TravelersUnited.org. Charlie, have you been encouraged or discouraged by the progress or lack thereof of travelers' rights in the last decade since you've been in business?
Well, when I first came to Washington, I came in at the same time that Obama was inaugurated. And the first 4 years were actually wonderful. I mean, we got a lot done. That's when we got the tarmac delay rules passed. A group called Flyers' Rights spearheaded that. And then after that, I came on board, and we then spearheaded other issues. We spearheaded the 24-hour rule. If you make a mistake, you have 24 hours to correct it or to cancel your reservation without penalty. The full fare advertising rule. They used to be able to say $60 to London, and then after, and with an asterisk, doesn't include taxes, fees, fuel surcharges, and it's only a one-way ticket. And we got that changed to where they have to tell you the truth. So when you get the ad and then you go to buy the ticket, it's the same price. We got the luggage compensation increased. We got the denied boarding compensation increased. So we've done a lot of things all at the very beginning of the Obama administration. Then for the second half of the Obama administration, nothing happened. I mean, seriously, all consumer protections just stayed the same, and we studied these rulemakings to death. And now during the Trump administration, they are actually saying, look, we're not going to do anything with the rulemakings. So, I mean, I was talking with friends, and they said, it sounds like at least the Trump administration is telling you the truth. And the last 4 years of the Obama administration just saw us dragged along and, down the primrose path, thinking things were going to change. I don't know which is better, thinking things are going to change or knowing absolutely they're not going to change. But we're still going to fight back. But I will say that the actions that we've just recently heard have started to galvanize the consumer protection community, and we're getting much more active.
It's important to note that Travelers United doesn't just represent flyers, but also those who use rail, bus, rental cars, cruises, and lodging. We're going to ask Charlie in a bit for his top tips for both frequent and infrequent travelers. So you're going to want to keep listening for that. Charlie, we did a story at VoyageReport.com at the end of November that airlines this year, 2017, are poised to haul in a record $57 billion in passenger fees. IdeaWorks and CarTrawler, which issue the forecast, wrote this warning to airlines, quote, "Some carriers continue to treat ancillary revenue as an opportunity to simply charge new fees without creating a better product." So what do you think about these constantly rising fees, not just at airlines, but resorts, hotels, you name it?
Look, any way the airlines want to tell us and price their product is fine with me. But they have to tell us what the fees are. They have to tell us what the airfares are. The hotels need to tell us what the room rate is. And then they've got to tell us if there are any mandatory fees added on. So whatever the way that they want to do it, it's more complex for the consumer, but it's also more complex for them. It costs them a lot of money to administer all of these different fees. However, they have found that they're taking the path of the least information. And that's our real problem. That's what we've been fighting against. I'll shift over to hotels just to give you an idea. Last year, I made a big effort to try to get hotel resort fees included in the room rate. Now, these resort fees are mandatory fees. You have to pay them. And they average around $29. And so what we end up doing is we end up with a room which is advertised for $100, but when you get to the hotel, it really costs you $130 about. And I just found that to be basic false advertising. So first we went to Congress. We tried to get them to pass a bill. We got a bill introduced into Congress, which didn't pass. Then we went to the FTC. We said, look, you guys are in charge of advertising. This is false advertising. They agreed with us, but they didn't do anything. They each did a study saying that this harms consumers, but they didn't do anything. And then the FTC totally changed. We got a new commissioner in, and all that died at the end of the Obama administration. But the part that's still going on is the work that we did with the National Association of Attorneys General. And there we have something like 46 different attorneys general that we brought together, and they have filed subpoenas against the hotels and the online travel agencies to try to figure out what's going on. And recently, they just went ahead and they filed a petition to try to force some of the hotel chains to provide the information that they were asking for. So we're in a situation where the legislative side didn't work, the regulatory side didn't work, but now we've got the judicial side, which is still plugging along. And hopefully this year we're going to get some sort of a resolution there where if there are mandatory fees that hotels charge, they have to be included in the room rate so that when you look at a chart and you see a listing of all the hotels from cheapest to most expensive, those prices are useful to you and they tell the truth, instead of today where some hotels that don't charge resort fees are being penalized because those who do charge resort fees don't include them in their room rates. And that's something else. That's something we've been working on, as well as all of the airline stuff.
And there's a website, resortfeechecker.com, that does try to demystify what you may pay at a resort, so listeners may want to check it out. Speaking of fees, Charlie, Congress is seriously considering raising the passenger facility charge. That's the $4.50 fee each of us have to pay per flight to help fund construction and projects at airports across the U.S. Lawmakers are now considering raising that to $8.50, almost double. And as we covered at VoyageReport.com, airline CEOs went to Congress in February. They testified before the House Subcommittee on Aviation that they need $100 billion for infrastructure projects at U.S. airports, they say, in the next 5 years. Charlie, do they have a point that airports need to be modernized? And if so, should we pay for it with this increased charge?
Well, Travelers United has been against increasing the passenger facility charge for as long as I've been in Washington. I stopped it on the first FAA bill that I was involved with. I worked together with the airlines to stop it then. We stopped it in the last FAA reauthorization bill. But this year we have a new twist. The Appropriations Committee has added it into the budget. And so now this is going to be decided sometime in the next couple of weeks. And so if airline consumers don't talk to their senators and congressmen about, say, whoa, wait a second, we shouldn't pay for everything, this is it may end up almost doubling. And the way that we look at it at Travelers United is that any time an airline executive gives a speech, sometime in the first two sentences of every speech, they say, our airport is the economic driving engine of the region. Okay, that's great. But how much money does the region pay for the airport? It turns out they pay almost nothing because the passengers pay everything. Almost every single municipal bond is guaranteed through and by passenger facility charges from all of the passengers. We pay the parking fees. We pay the retail fees. We pay to eat there. We pay all the extra charges for Uber and Lyft and for taxis. And we end up paying ultimately all the fees at the airport that the airlines pay, takeoff and landing fees. It's built into the tickets. So it's just not fair for us to do everything and to pay for all of it. And my situation and what I've talked to congressmen about is that the localities themselves that benefit from the airports need to come up with a way that they can pitch in to keeping the airports going. And that's a battle which we've been fighting for quite some time. It's not over yet. We've got 2 more weeks before they vote on the budget. And the House still doesn't even have it in their budget at all. It's only come up as a part of the Senate budget, which is now going to leadership, and they're going to try to figure out how to work a middle path. And I hope that they have a path of no, because I don't think we should have to pay anything extra.
And we had on officials from Pittsburgh's airport and LAX early this year. They're both doing billion-dollar modernization projects. I think they're going to be watching this closely as well. The Wall Street Journal is reporting that the Trump administration will make a push in January for this $1 trillion infrastructure package that the president campaigned on for roads, bridges, rail, airport improvements. What's your take on that, Charlie?
Well, it's necessary. But what I don't want to see is I don't want to see the passenger facility charge and airport improvements getting swept into that whole area where we have to pay more because we're passengers and we're paying a quote unquote user fee. Somewhere that community is using the airport as well. They have to pay their own user fees. And for the other issues, for the life of me, I can't understand after we've gone through years of having gasoline prices at the $4 a gallon level, and now we're back down to the $2 and $2.50 level, why we can't throw another tax on gasoline. And I think that everyone I speak to thinks that that would be the fairest way to do things. But for some reason, Congress is refusing to even look at that. And that kind of an increase would pay for new highways, pays for new bridges, pays for new interstates. I think that that would be a big solution and a good solution for us.
Listeners, we're going to be asking Charlie in a bit here for not only his top tips for travelers, but also his forecast for 2018 and what you can expect as a traveler. So keep listening for that. Now, Charlie, here in the U.S., the big 3 legacy airline carriers, Delta, United, American, they have been kicking and screaming about this open skies treaty that has allowed international airlines to bring in some really cheap fares and, in some cases, top-of-the-line service to the U.S. market. Some of those legacy carriers say the Middle Eastern airlines are getting illegal subsidies and that the government should crack down on them. Is this skirmish good or bad for the average traveler?
Well, the skirmish doesn't make a lot of difference right now because we still have the open skies treaties in place. However, we're going to we really need to keep open skies going because we need the competition. And I do not support the major airlines at all when they're trying to stop the Middle Eastern airlines from flying in here. Basically, what they've done is what the legacy carriers have done over the years is they've totally ignored Southern Africa and South Asia. And that's where we have the largest increase in the middle class going in the world. It's, the middle class is growing at about a 10% rate there. And here in the United States, it may be receding. I mean, I'm not even sure, but it's not growing at any 10%. And so I think that we need good service into those areas, and open skies is very, very important. The other area where it's more important to local U.S. passengers is on our transatlantic airfares. Once we got Norwegian Air approved, once we got WOW Air starting to fly over Iceland, Iceland Air is back as a discounter. And now, all of a sudden, we've got critical mass And 2 years ago, the absolute least expensive ticket you could get across the Atlantic was around $1,500 to $1,700. Now, every day you can go in and you can find something between the $500 and $1,000 range. And finally, prices have come down dramatically. And even with those drops in prices, the airlines are making record profits. So why did we wait so long? Why didn't the airlines allow us to enjoy the lower airfares? And that's because basically in the United States domestically, these three big airlines control almost 80% of the market. Southwest, if you throw them in, it brings it up to 80%, but Southwest is a different animal. And internationally, with the airline alliances, you think that you have 20 airlines flying across the Atlantic and competing with each other, but you don't. They're formed into alliances, which has actually been encouraged by our own government. And those three alliances control more than 80% of the transatlantic market. And so when gas prices plummeted, they didn't have to drop the airfares by a bit. But when competition came in, all of a sudden our airfares dropped.
Well, and it looks like 2017 will be the 8th year in a row that the airlines will book a profit recovering after the Great Recession. So, Charlie, before I ask you to peer into your crystal ball, if Santa could bring you one gift this holiday season, one gift for travelers, what would you ask for? What would you put on Santa's wish list, Charlie?
Number one would be airline price transparency. We want to know how much it costs us to fly. And the price transparency goes over to hotels as well. We want to know how much does it cost to spend the night in the hotel. I don't want to have smoke and mirrors. I don't want to get only airfares and only room rates. Give me the total price with your ancillary fees and resort fees baked in.
Santa, are you listening? Did you just hear that from Charlie? We'll see if he brings it for you this year. Okay, Charlie, let's get out your crystal ball here. Let's look ahead to next year. What can travelers expect for 2018? Give us your best forecast.
Well, in some things, I think that from the hotels, I think we're going to see hotel fees, resort fees being rolled into their room rates. That'll be one good thing. Two, global entry will continue to expand, and PreCheck. These are two of the best gifts anyone can give themselves for the holidays. They may merge the two organizations to save money, but that's going to be something which is really going to be happening. And then we've got the other thing is, as we get more transparency, we're going to have more people flying on good, solid airlines that treat their customers with great respect, like Southwest, where they don't have all these nickel and diming fees and so on. So did I answer the right question there?
Yeah, and Charlie, I don't want to sound like I'm advocating for a government product, but global entry, I have to agree with you. I think that's probably shaved days off my life when I wave at the people in the long immigration line when I'm coming back from overseas, and I just sort of, breeze past them, actually. And of course, listeners, remember, when you buy global entry, it's $100 for 5 years. You also get TSA PreCheck included for those domestic flights, and it's $85 on its own. So for $15 more, you get for 5 years this expedited immigrations and customs service. So I highly recommend it. And one other security service that I would mention, Clear Security. Delta now has, I think, a minor stake in it, 5%, 10%, something like that. Clear Security is expanding its biometric, expanding in airports and even major sports stadiums around the country. If you use our promo code Voyage, you'll get 3 months free to try it out. Charlie, before we let you go, I do have to ask you for your best travel tips. Certainly global entry and PreCheck would be one of them. You've had a lifetime of exploration and advocacy and travel. So what are some top tips and tricks and advice for frequent and infrequent travelers?
I think that, global entry, of course, is very important, but make sure you join the program. That's tip number one. Number two, make sure that you know what the price you're going to pay is going to be. Do your homework and look at it. Tip number three, make sure that you always, if you've got any kind of customer service problem, send it into the Department of Transportation. And tip number four, is always use online travel agents, because right now the online travel agents are the only place you can go to actually comparison shop for airline airfares across airlines. Whenever we buy directly from the airline, we're kind of cutting off our nose to spite our face, because we are eliminating the travel agents side where they can actually help us get the best deal. And the final tip would be in terms of online travel agencies and then basic old travel agents. Find yourself a great travel agent, stick with them, pay the $25 extra per flight, and have someone on your side if you've got a problem.
And when you talk about filing a complaint with the Department of Transportation, it's online. It's very simple. You don't need a stamp. You don't need an envelope. I had to do it recently on that fare that Virgin Australia canceled 11 days later, and it took me all of about 2 or 3 minutes. That's what you're referring to, Charlie, right?
Exactly. And so make sure that you do it that way, and it will work.
Charlie Leocha is the president and co-founder of Travelers United, an advocacy organization for travelers of all ages and modes of transportation. You can follow the organization on Twitter at Travelers.org and on Facebook on Travelers United.org. Charlie, thanks so much for being on the Voyage Report podcast. Really great advice and tips and advocacy.
Thank you for having me, and let's try to do this again sometime.
Absolutely. Listeners, what do you think about travelers' rights? Have you been proactive about exercising your rights when you travel? Let us know by rating this podcast, giving us a review, and sharing it on social media. We have guests every week talking about travel news and trends, so be sure to subscribe to our podcast. We'd sure appreciate your review. It helps bring more awareness to our journalism and original content. And if you have an idea for a future guest on our podcast, please reach out at voyagereport.com and let us know. Thanks for joining us today. I'm Mark Albert. Bon voyage.
You've been listening to the Voyage Report podcast. Get the scoop on travel at voyagereport.com.